Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, and I got the birthday boy in the house. We are blessed to have Blaine Bartlett, blainebartlett.com. Happy birthday, my friend.
Hey, it's been a great one. It's going to be a great year. Amazing. Love it.
It is amazing, and it keeps getting better and better. So, one of the things that I've learned as I got older is that we have a different perspective that is the benefit of time, linear time, that there's certain things that only age provides us if we are looking for the lessons, and we can gain wisdom and perspective. And it ranges from sports to business to relationships. And considering we are all celebrating all that's celebratable, especially your birthday, what are some of the things looking back that you have learned that you see are definitely lessons that are equated to just plain living a longer life?
That's, I love the question. One thing that I really have taken to heart is that there's very little in life that is serious. Mike Dooley, and you know Mike as well as I do. He writes, this weekly thing called Tut, and I've played with this notion for years. When I was born, I was given a ticket, and that ticket said admit one. And that's all it said. There were no guarantees written on it, no instruction manual or anything. But what was interesting about I mentioned Mike Dooley here for a moment. That admit one was an admission into this domain of time and space. And time and space, there are constraints that are implicit with both time and space. The limitations are illusory, but the experience is that they are real. And the older I get, the more I appreciate that the limitations that I think are present with time and space are literally illusory. I've got a lot less runway in front of me than I have in back of me, just in terms of a space context. But I'm having more fun today. I'm more creative. I'm more productive. I'm more energetic. I'm more alive than I've been at probably the last 60 to 70 years. I'm having a ball right now. I don't experience a whole lot of limits that I would have thought would come with, when I was in my 20s, imagining being where I'm at today. It's kind of like, oh my God, I can't imagine being that old. I'm having a ball. I can't imagine being that young.
Right. Yeah, no, that paradigm shift of, hey, I am, what am I doing to interfere with it, in understanding space of exist between we actually see or think that we see. But you and I will have a celebratory tequila together and explore the time and space continuum as we have in the past. And I look forward to it, celebrating with you and Cynthia. But we've band waiting in the wings. Ken On is here. He's the president of Hagerty Marketplace, and I'm a huge fan of this business. Hagerty.com. I guess, as you know, I vacation every day, and one of the ways, Ken, I vacation is I jump in my 55 Ford Thunderbird and I cut down
that's awesome.
the beach, and it just transcends whatever's going on in the day. And with children and a dog who just had back surgery and multiple investments in businesses, sometimes I just need that car to transcend me. And it is an energy, there's an experience, and you guys are the experts in creating that experience and providing those experiences. You have these classic car events that most people are around, in auctions, by the way, high profile auctions around the world. And I just want to welcome you and thank you because I've been a part of those for years.
Thank you very much for having me on. Very nice to see you, David, and nice to see you, Blaine.
So my first question, Ken, is there's certain things in life I talk about people buy on emotion for logical reasons. And when I attend your events, people are buying on emotion for logical reasons. There's a lifestyle in your membership. How important is it, that emotion, as it is in sports with cars and classic vehicles?
I'm probably biased, but I think emotions is always logical, right? And it's all about emotions to me. Cars mean something. Cars are generally we think about it as mode of transportation to go from point A to point B, but true car people think about cars as something that makes your heart beat, makes sort of appeals to your emotions. And just like you said, jumping in that 55 Thunderbird, for me, after a intense week on an early Saturday morning, jumping in a car and just going for a drive with no destination. I don't know where point B is, but I'm driving from point A to enjoy the road and enjoy the sound of the engine. That really means something.
Ken, I'm struck by what you're saying here, and I'm really impressed that Julia's letting David drive the Thunderbird. But what the whole notion of beauty, classical cars are beauty. Art is beautiful. I mean, nice art is just, and beauty has something to do with the soul of that whatever it is being expressed in that form. So when I hear you talking about getting in the car, and I hear David talking about getting in the Thunderbird, and hearing the sound of the engine, I mean, there's something there. Just the lines of a classic car. Where did you, and this is kind of a curiosity question, this is the first time we've met, where did you start appreciating the beauty such that it transcended much of what was going on? Because you talk about emotion and logic. In my experience, I don't particularly think of emotion as being logical. I experience it as being something that just, it doesn't just, but it's something that appears when I'm touched by something, logically or illogically. I'm touched by it. Mm-hmm. Where did that come true for you, or how did that come into place for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think by the way, I justify purchase of a car or having a car that seems very logical, but it's really the emotion that helps me define that logic and more importantly, communicate to my wife why I need another car. But reflecting back on my life, I'm not sure if I appreciate the way I do now. I know I didn't, but at a very young age, for me, cars were something that really appealed to me. I grew up in South Korea, in Seoul as a child, and my father used to travel abroad for business. And one of the things he did was, I guess it was just total serendipitous, where he brought some Matchbox cars, when I was a child. And in Korea at the time, in the early 80s, there were only a handful of brands and a handful of models, and they were all Hyundai ponies, and you knew exactly what you were looking at all the time. And I guess I had an interest in cars since I was a kid. But man, when I saw a Matchbox car that was a Camaro and a Mercedes, and it's just a totally different design, aesthetics. I remember just holding on to these things, really appreciating the what it looked like. And obviously that's very different than how I think about it now. But I do think even at a young age, just like children can get really into art. There's a reason why people call cars rolling art, right? And yes. And for me, I think it was really the design, the idea that you push a pedal and this thing starts moving, and just the imagination around what the car might sound like based on that Matchbox. In fact, that's sort of how I learned English and alphabet, because I wanted to know what it's called. And if you look at the bottom of those cars, it actually shows, says what it is. And so when my father says, "Oh, that's a Ford Mustang," how do you read that? And so, yeah, it's part of my development. I guess ever since I was 6 or 7 years old when I started to really like it. And then from that point on, I think cars have been always part of my life. I never thought my passion for cars and interest for cars would intersect with my career. But Nikhil Hagerty, who's the CEO of Hagerty, and I were having a conversation not too long ago, and he said, the great thing about it is we get to do this. It's not that it's our job and we have to do this. We get to work with clients. We get to work around cars. We get to see, people bidding at auctions. We get to bring cars to auctions or attend events and concours. So, yeah, I think for me that first moment, I don't know the exact date or moment, but it was somewhere when I was 6 or 7 years old. To answer your question.
Yeah. And you have an event coming up this week in St. Moritz, and next week in Dallas. There's always an event going on, but there's also the digital side and the business side of what goes on, which is just expanded. And I love the intersection of your passion with cars, because it's occurred with me. I remember thinking and being so disappointed when I was graduating law school to be an oil and gas litigator. And I thought, wow, now I'm going to get in the internet. But, you know, I've been a kid that carried a football around with me since I was 5 years old. And although I realized in college that dream was going to die in college, of playing football for the rest of my opportunity to play, it was funny that it intersected quite early in my career, even though if you would have connected the dots backwards, I never would have believed I ended up where I did with Lee Steinberg and Warren Moon, etc. But there's so much business. I see cars as a backdrop, just like I see sports. There's insurance. There's an online marketplace. There's, you know, classifieds. There's so many different parts and pieces of this business that you guys have provided quality service and advice and financing of cars. You know, we're talking about billions of dollars in each of these areas. My thing is, with all the different opportunities, how do you rank out the personal events? Because I know Blaine and I talk about there's so much virtual in the world. There's so much digital. There's so much, but you know, I see a huge trend that people are going to value driving an actual car and also showing up to events and buying a car at an auction in person, not just digitally.
Yeah, it's a good question. Digital and the proliferation of internet and the amount of information that's out there has really changed the hobby, as well as how people are knowledgeable about cars now and the amount of information that's out there. But I would argue that all of those things are great and additive, but have not replaced in-person gatherings, in-person driving. You know, I say that because you think about the lockdown that we had a few years ago during COVID. You know, industry participants like us had no other option but to just rely on the digital channel. Interestingly, the collectors really quickly adapted, and I'm not just talking about auctions. I'm talking about virtual gatherings. You know, looking at classifieds, all of the rest, Zooms, but when that lockdown started to wane and people were able to gather, by that point, there were some questions around, is this going to change the hobby? Are we no longer going to have live auctions and live gatherings and live Concours? Totally contrarily, when things opened up, it came back with a big, you know, force. And I think the reason is, we talked about passion and emotion earlier, more than logic. And it's something that stirs our soul, but it's also something that we share with other enthusiasts and collectors, the interest. So when we started to open up auctions, and now if you look at the Concours events, whether that's at Pebble or the Amelia, they are, you know, more attendees there than we've ever seen, even prior to COVID lockdowns. And I think that goes back to people view a lot of these events as not just getting together, and of course you can see the cars in person, you can touch them, you can feel them, you open the door, you smell them, right? And someone, you know, the owner starts the car and you could hear it. So those are all things that really stir our souls and, you know, and appeal to our senses. But beyond that, it's the people that you see at these events. That's, you know, that's great way to gather, reconnect. And I think we as human beings, we're social animals, right? And you know, gathering is, you know, right now we have a virtual conversation. It's great, but if all three of us were in a room together, I think it'd be even better, right?
I know it would be, and Pebble Beach would be a great place to be in person together. That's for
Yeah.
sure. That works anyway, Ken, on if you are not familiar with Hagerty and all the different things that they're doing, if you haven't attended an auction, a classic car event, if you haven't driven a classic car, if you aren't part of, at least, you know, I love as an entertainment just looking at the classifieds. It's so much fun, and that's how I ended up buying the car. Is I was just searching classifieds and I brought up this Ford Thunderbird, and my wife leaned over and said, "That's my dream car." And I made it her 50th birthday present as a surprise. Held it there in Michigan for 9 months. But I appreciate all the different things that you've done for me in my life and my experience. And We love it. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
And we'll see you soon. I love
Great
it.
to meet you,
We'll have
Ken.
you back on. Thank
Very
you,
nice to
Ken.
meet you, Blaine.
Wow, great guest to start
Oh.
off. Now, I've been super excited as well. So today's like a passion day for me. I love the cars, I love the classified. But if anyone has watched my content, including this show, which is 537 episodes with an average of 3.5 people, don't ask me how they come up with that. So it's thousands of interviews. The way I close almost every interview I do is be more interested than interesting. It's one of my favorite quotes ever. I don't even remember where I learned it or how I learned it, but I've been stealing it or re-quoting it. I can't find the person who first said it, but this is the CEO of my quote, the CEO of Learn It, and his book, The Learn It All Leader, is absolutely aligned with being more interested than the know-it-all, being interesting. And he gives some great advice, not just in the theoretical, but actually how to have the learn it mindset as a leader, how to have the different characteristics and traits as a leader to learn it all. And of course, the pragmatic tools, the skills and the knowledge that's necessary to be a learn it all. Welcome to the show, Damon Lemby, my learn it all hero. Thanks for joining us.
Well, David and Blaine, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Well, I'm sure Blaine is equally as excited as I am. Now, you give an approach about something I've never really thought about inherent in this idea of a know-it-all is if you are a know-it-all and you're more interesting than interested, then most likely you're probably struggling with being an imposter, hiding from something. I think in your book, you kind of approach a way that we can reveal or elevate an awareness to this imposter syndrome and utilize your book in order to effectuate learning more, growing more, accelerating more in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I try to. I mean, my whole approach is, you have learn-it-alls and you have know-it-alls, however you want to call it. And I just look at learn-it-alls as people who come into it with an open mind. I typically think that there's 4 traits that really come down to being a learn-it-all, which are humility, curiosity, courage, and also integrity. And when I talk about, let's say with courage, a lot of times it's like getting out of your comfort zone, kind of like you said a second ago, David, is just like not being afraid to admit that you don't know everything and being curious as to what else is out there, and maybe that your opinion isn't always the best way, and that you're open to learn more. And like you said earlier, also a second ago, it's like a lot of times the so-called know-it-alls, it's because they're hiding something, or maybe they truly lack self-confidence.
Yeah. I've spent probably close to 40 years in the field of leadership development, worked with some of the largest companies and some of the most successful leaders on the planet. And one of the things that I was struck with very early on, and this continues to carry itself forward, is the focus on the titular leader, the formal leader in an organization. And what's missing in that, I want to just check this out with you, Damon, is the first and second followers, who are also leaders. Because if they didn't take up the task and all of a sudden they look behind them and they got folks following them, they end up being leaders too. So where my question lands here is, in the work that you do at Learn It, is there a focus on a broad spectrum conversation around what does it actually mean to be an effective leader, which is embedded in learning?
Great question. And so my definition as leader, to be completely honest, is you don't have to lead a small team or a large team. I think everybody, Blaine, can be a leader. Whether you're an individual contributor or as a parent or whatever it is, you could lead in your own way. And so, yes, I think that it goes down the 1 or 2 levels. It's about how you carry yourself and how you can model your behavior and around others.
And inherent in being a learn it all as well, we have to shift our perspective of leadership as well as in recruitment and retention. And I see that when we are learn it alls, that we take a more of an approach of what is somebody's potential rather than their history. And, when we're a learn-it-all, it is inherent in potential. When we're know-it-alls or we're looking for know-it-alls, then we're really looking at a historical analysis of success or relationship capital. How does that relationship between the potential and history result in, creating a bigger and better organization and better leaders?
Well, one of the first things you mentioned that we deal with a lot, and Blaine, I'm sure you did in your 40 years of leadership, is retention and attrition, which is a huge cost associated with that. And so I think that organizations, it's important to invest in your team and develop as leaders. I'm also a big believer, David, when possible, to hire for potential over experience. Now, you can't in every situation, of course, but I mean, that's what I've kind of, over the last 28 years at Learn It, that's really what I feel like I've been able to build a great culture, and it's because I've hired people who are smarter than me, who are better than me, who have diverse opinions.
Yeah.
But then, and also, it's more than just that. You also have to kind of sit back and give them the space to do the works, give them the space to learn, grow, and make mistakes. I'm sure you're familiar with the Southwest story about the 10-minute turn.
With Herb.
With Herb. I referred to that. I talk about it in my book, but I've referred to that hundreds of times, right? That's the only way they could, the short version of the story is, for your listeners out there who haven't heard it, the only way they could, do enough flights to, stay in business and keep the fares down was to have a 10-minute term where the industry average was like 15, 16 minutes. And when Herb took it to his executive team and board, they're like, "You're crazy. There's no way we can do this. We need to hire people from Continental, Eastern Airlines, all of this." And he said the exact opposite. He's like, "I'm not hiring any of those people because there's no way they're going to believe that we can do this. I'm going to hire sharp individuals who don't know any better and train them up and give them the opportunity and tell them that this is what we have to do." And they got it down to 10 minutes, which is awesome, I think.
Yeah. And unreasonable people tend to get unreasonable results.
Right.
Yeah.
You just kind of move in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to dream big too, I mean, you gotta go for it.
And a lot of that comes from an athletic background. I always loved, we were talking before of my dream of being a football player.
Yeah.
And that dream dying. I think you also dreamed of being an MLB star yourself. And the carryover, though, through all the education, the curriculum, all the personal development of being even a learn-it-all, it doesn't substitute the learning in the experiential realm as well.
Oh, totally.
And so, for me, the athletic side of what I've done is really lended itself because I was a student of football, not just a player. How important was it for you to be a student of baseball, for example, and how have you carried that forward into your book and into your career?
So I was listening to one of your previous episodes where you talked about how, as a Division III football player, that you learn more there carry forward in your life than you did through business school or everything. And I feel the same way. Absolutely. And it's funny. I had lunch the other day with some guy I just met who's a big private equity guy. And he was number 300 or 400 in the world 15 years ago in tennis. And he didn't even know anything about my book. And he just said, "You played baseball at Arizona State, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." And so he went through the same thing about how he learned so much more there than he did at Wharton or anywhere else, about how to do it. How to lead or how to be successful in the business world. Like what I talk about in my book is I was fortunate enough to I played for 3 Hall of Fame college baseball coaches at Pepperdine, Andy Lopez, and a guy by the name of John Nochi, and then at Arizona State, Jim Brock, who is super, coached everybody from Barry Bonds and whatever. And I took what I learned there. I was a student of baseball, because I enjoyed it. And but more than anything, I just wanted to work hard at it. But the lessons I learned from each of those individuals is what helped me really model my leadership skills and, the successes and failures that go along with it over the years.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I
Yeah.
just have to comment one thing, Blaine, real quick.
Yeah,
One of the statistics that I love is, I mean, it's extraordinary statistic. I think it's over 90% of women executives in the Fortune 500 played college sports.
Yeah.
So
Really?
so if you, I mean, you really can see it, especially in that realm. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. Like what they learn, what we learn on the
Yeah.
field, it carries over. The greatest training ground to be a leader, I believe, and an intelligent follower, but also to be consistent and persistent in the pursuit of your potential, which is also aligned with this learn it all type of philosophy. Sorry for interrupting you, Blaine. You got our last question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just, you know, that whole idea of sports. I mean, I was a college gymnast, and
There you go.
yeah, that you know, in
You're
University of
you're a
Oregon,
big gymnast, Blaine.
I was a
Most
big
gymnasts are
gymnast.
built like
Yeah.
me.
Good for
I
you.
should have been a gymnast. I'd have been much better.
But
I
the
could-
idea of learning, I mean, and this is what I'm actually keying in here, Damon, is the most effective leaders, are they position themselves as not just curious. Curiosity opens the door, but to David's point, they're interested.
Mhm.
And that was, for me, what allowed me to excel to the degree I did in gymnastics at the university was I'd see a routine. I'd see something that, I'd read something in Gymnast Magazine. I'd go, ooh, I'd get curious about it. And then I'd start pulling it apart without the assumption that I had any bloody clue in the world how to do this thing. And that, I think, is a hallmark of an effective leader, is that they're willing to move beyond their facade and that vulnerability. You can't learn unless you're going to be willing to be vulnerable. Would that be an accurate assessment in your experience?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things that you said right there was about, reading about this or seeing this. One of the things I learned is, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So you could take different aspects from different people, and you could try it out, and you can kind of piece it together for yourself, whether it comes to leadership or innovation or whatever you do. So I think that is a very important part. And I think one of the key traits or skills that athletes have is the ability to learn. And I really think that learning agility is one of the really top skills, especially in the world we're in right now, where the lifespan of skills are from 5 years to about 2 or even less, is the ability to keep learning. And being vulnerable is a big part of that, because I think there's a paradox in being vulnerable. You want to be open, but you also have to be self-confident. You have to be confident in your ability to say, hey, you know what? I don't know all this. I'm going to try this, and not being afraid to fail. Sometimes people aren't vulnerable because they just, where we started this conversation earlier, they lack the self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Just read the Tao Te Ching. Read the Tao Te Ching and realize how being quiet and learning portrays ourselves in a radical, humble way, which creates greater growth and greater potential in our lives, which is completely aligned. The Learn It All Leader is a must read. And there's where we can get it on Amazon right there, and learn how to have the mindset, the traits, and the tools to effectuate pursuing your potential and learning, whether you're on the field, off the field, in the boardroom, or in your home, remotely working. The learn it all attitude is something that obviously Blaine and I definitely adhere to. I would like to mention one thing. We know we can't guess exactly what Blaine's age is on his birthday here, but if he's reading Gymnast Magazine, we know he's not 25 years old.
Yeah, so. I was going to say, where do you find Gymnast Magazine these days?
Yeah, because I guarantee you.
I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah.
Yeah, gymnasts today are watching YouTube. There's no doubt about it. You'd have done much better in gymnastics if you had YouTube back then.
I would have.
Slow-mo and videos.
Out of there.
These were stop action pictures.
Get some.
You had flipped those flashcards. You're flipping them real quick.
Oh, yeah, the flip it where the pages go like that.
That's okay. My uncle directed the first Super Bowl, and he recently passed. My uncle Larry, who Blaine actually met in my Aunt Maryland, but he did the first replay at the Super Bowl, and what he did was he taped up pictures on a chalkboard, and he slowly showed the pictures, and that's what created the replay. The very first Super Bowl replay was a bunch of pictures on a chalkboard that he taped up in sequential order to show a replay and slowing down the aperture. It was pretty interesting, a great story and tidbit, but
creative.
we're learning every day. The Learn It
We
All
are.
leader himself. Thank you, David, for joining us. Come back, join us more. I'm sure Blaine wants you to have him on his shows, and we have many other shows.
Love
as
to,
well.
Blaine.
Love to have you on. Good.
Great guest.
I'll reach
Thanks,
out to you,
gentlemen.
David. Thanks.
Reach out to me. Thanks, Blaine.
Great job. Bye-bye, David. Thank you. All right. Edward's warming up. He's stretching in the green room right now. Eduardo is here. Eduardo Brisano, global keynote speaker and facilitator, right up our alley, Blaine. And he's written a book, The Performance Paradox. And we have a reconciliation between the power of mindset in action. Karma actually is defined as action. So I'm really curious how karma interplays within the performance paradox as well. Welcome to the show, Eduardo.
Thank you, David. Blaine, great to be here.
Great to have you.
Yeah.
Well, we can't just get on the stages and speak. And to be a global keynote speaker means that we've had a well-developed idea. And through that, I think is illustrative of what you are actually teaching in the performance paradox. Because in order to be a global keynote speaker, you, I think, have to actually take action to the power of the mindset and the experiences and have great growth and other things. For you, I'd love for if you could tell me how you've utilized the performance paradox to become a global keynote speaker.
Sure. So the performance paradox is something that I learned from other people and in working with other people. And it is the counterintuitive reality that if we focus only on performing, our performance suffers. If we're only focused on getting things done as best as we know how, trying to minimize mistakes, we stagnate. We stay at the same level of effectiveness. And I realized that I was doing this in my career. I was trying to always look like I knew everything. And, if I received feedback, I would I react defensively, like make up stories and rationalize why what people were saying was not true. I wasn't working to improve. I was working to prove myself. And I learned a lot of these things in starting to work with Stanford professor Carol Dweck, which I started working with in 2007. She's been my mentor ever since. And I learned what her work is, which is that in order to improve, we have to believe that we can change. That's called a growth mindset. But I also learned that a growth mindset is key, is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We also need to know how to change and how to grow. And the foundation of that is the distinction between learning and performing. And we need to do both of those things. And so how to do those things as individuals, teams, and organizations is what my book, The Performance Zone, The Performance Paradox, is about.
There's a drive-by phrase that you tossed out there that I want to come back to: working to prove versus working to improve. And that, it's kind of like, when you said that, I just grabbed my pen and I wrote this down. The performance paradox, and when I first saw the title, it's kind of like performance paradox. Right? What's the paradox embedded in there? And it is about I'm proving myself. That's where you get wrapped around the axle, so to speak. That's my grandfather's term. Yeah. But the idea of I'm thinking of the British cycling team here, and when they ended up winning the tour, they had never placed, let alone they hardly even showed up. But they started improving because they weren't trying to prove anything. And the whole focus was, let's bite-size this. Let's chunk this down and look at what we can do to improve, putting our feet on the pedal, getting our feet into the stirrup quickly. It's kind of like, John Wooden, let's practice putting our socks on. Those sorts of things. Where did this come from for you? I'm always fascinated by this question, Eduardo. What was the germ that led you down this path that actually illuminated something that I think is actually quite profound?
Yeah, it was a number of things. One of those things was I had the privilege of getting to know the late Professor Anders Ericsson, who coined the term deliberate practice. And in helping people, when people were a growth mindset, which is kind of the work of Carol Dweck that we've been doing for the last 16 years, people became really interested in that. And Microsoft in particular was the first company to deliberately build a growth mindset culture. And a lot of other organizations became interested in building cultures of learning and performing. And in the early days of that, when I was doing workshops with executives, trying to help them see the work of the importance of improvement and learning, I would talk a lot about deliberate practice and the work of Anders Ericsson. And people were interested in that. But deliberate practice is what you're saying that kind of cyclists or John Wooden do, where you might kind of be very specific about how you put your socks on, or be very specific about how you do a particular move in like a drop shot or top spin or whatever it is. And for people, they find it to be interesting, but it's less applicable for everyday life. And so what I was iterating, trying to get people to get something that they could act upon in the modern workplace. And I realized that one thing that distinguishes deliberate practice from other things is the difference between performing, trying to do things as best as we know how, trying to minimize mistakes, or learning, which is leaping into the unknown, doing things that are specific activities that are designed for improvement rather than designed for immediate results. And I realized that there's deliberate practice, but there's a lot of other strategies that we can use for that, like experimentation or soliciting feedback, or how we structure our meetings, that are not just about getting things done, but also sharing what we're learning or sharing questions we have for each other. And those are things that are different than just getting things done. So it was a search for myself to better understand and learning from people who have done a lot of great work, and in trying to help other people figure out how do they build cultures of learning and high performance in their organizations.
Amazing. I'm also, I wanted always to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but instead I got to represent them and market the Pro Football Hall of Fame with my business partner, Warren Moon. But you're in a Hall of Fame I'm trying to get into, and I was wondering, how do you get inducted into the Happiness Hall of Fame?
Yeah, that was surprising to me too. I'd never heard of that until I was doing a keynote once, and somebody approached me after the keynote and they say, "Hey, we're from the Happiness Hall of Fame, and we're here because we really love your work and we would like to induct you into the hall." I was like, "Well, that sounds really cool. That sounds amazing." But it actually is really meaningful to me, because I grew up very unhappy. Actually, I didn't like the world. I didn't like a lot of things about the world. And the change, growth mindset is about the belief that we can change and the deliberate work to continue to change throughout our lives. The change in myself that I've made that is most meaningful to me is I've learned how to be happy and how to generate happiness and my own emotions from within myself, rather than before. I used to think that happiness was a function of my circumstances. And if I just did this, or if I just accomplished this, then I would be happy. And I realized actually happiness is a choice and like a set of habits that I can build in order to change my whole life experience. So because of that big change I've made in myself, that recognition is really meaningful to me.
And it should be.
Yeah, and it's very much aligned with the whole notion of, the idea of working to improve, because everything we do is a habit. I mean, over time, anything that we practice, brushing my teeth becomes habituated, and I'm off to the races. I don't even think about it anymore. Most people, by the time they get to be our ages, and I think we've got about 4 decades covered here, at least, we've practiced a lot of things. And when we stop learning, and Wardo, I just want to acknowledge you bringing this book to the table. That distinction, I'm very struck by that distinction. I come back to that. Working to improve, continuously improve, and that's the source of happiness in life. It is. I get one. I said this at the right top of the show. I get a ticket that says admit one, and there's no guarantees. So I get to make it up, and you've got a pretty good, I think, roadmap there for how to make it up effectively.
Thanks, Blaine. And I appreciate and I agree with what you're saying, in that happiness, or this improvement, right? These habits to improve and to continue to evolve, are not only change the destination, our results, our performance, but also they change the journey. They make us happy because they create awe and discovery, but also we can get to know each other better because we're more curious, we ask more questions, we listen better, so we develop deeper relationships. And we also experience less anxiety and depression because we all struggle, we all, there's changes going on all the time. And when we are not focused on continuous improvement, then those changes feel harder, they feel more permanent, they feel like things that are more a threat to us as opposed to things that we can learn from and overcome.
Beautiful.
And I was blessed to watch a very popular TED Talk of yours, how to get better at things you care about. And I think inherent in that, in the pursuit of our potential to improve, a lot of people, they want to get better, but they haven't really focused in on, well, it's a lot easier to get better at things I care about than just get better at things. And it takes attention plus intention to create the coincidences that we want. How impactful is it within the context of improvement to think about what we care about first and then figure out how to get better at that?
Yeah, it's super important because first, it's not effective to try to get better at everything, like you're saying. I mean, that's just not effective. So it's important to be clear about what do I want to spend my energy on and my focus and attention on, both to perform and to learn. And so getting clear on what's most important to us, then we can direct our efforts toward that. But also because when we are clear on what our highest level goals are, then we're less likely to get lost in whatever's in our to-do list. We tend to just have a bunch of stuff in our to-do list, be super busy to get those things done, and just focus on executing and performing that to-do list, and not asking the question of why do I care about this in the first place? Like, right, asking why a couple of times so that we uncover what is most important to us, and then ask the question, how can I get better at that thing that is most important? And the answer might be doing something completely different that's on my to-do list. It might be a completely different strategy.
That's amazing. Well, Eduardo, you are doing great work, and there's no doubt why you've been inducted into the Happiness Hall of Fame. And if you have any nominations available, Blaine Bartlett would be my first choice. That man is incredible. He has enlightened and empowered so many people to be happy. He is on my mission of empowering others to empower others to be happy. Eduardo is a global keynote speaker. Check out both of his TED Talks. He is also an amazing author of The Performance Paradox. Go ahead, turn the power of mindset into actual action. Action is the karma that we all desire. Eduardo, come and join us again. Once again, Blaine, I'm sure you would love to get into depth about all that's here and how we can improve instead of prove. That's my takeaway for this great interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I second that nomination, and great to meet you both.
Awesome. Thank you. There's
Thank you,
another
Eduardo.
birthday present for you. The induction into
Hey,
the
there you
Happiness
go.
Hall of Fame. It's a day of paradox, my friend, and we would be
It
amiss
is.
but to have an extraordinary cleanup hitter coming up. The Dr. Nicole Price is here, CEO of Lively Paradox, drnicoleprice.com. And, her book is one in which, I think, to me, is at the core of, in Chinese culture, the main meaning, spark the heart. And it's determinative upon empathy, and utilizing empathy to engineer a better place, a better circumstance, a better situation in our organizations. Welcome to Office Hours, Dr. Nicole Price.
Thank you for having me.
And, I want to start with the illogical, which is that you believe, I don't like to talk for others, that there was no place for empathy in the business world. Is that true?
Well, at one point in my life, I was one of those people for sure.
Nice. And what led you to the new paradox, the Lively Paradox, that empathy may actually play a critical role in critical decision making in business or organizations?
Well, there are two ways to learn empathy, I think, and one is in a classroom setting, but the other way is through a series of life experiences. And I chose the harder way, which is a series, which is a series of life experiences. And I used to believe that empathy was the enemy of productivity.
Ooh.
Yeah, as an engineer, if I've got 50 million parts I need to get out at the end of the week, I need to be able to plug Blaine in if David can't make it. And so you do tend to start thinking of people as cogs in a wheel because Blaine's personal situation can't get in the way of production. And I had no idea that my training was causing me to act sometimes in inhumane, unempathetic ways. But because of a series of personal experiences, I recognize that there are people at the end of our data points, and if we can recognize that, it'll help us in getting our outcomes.
There are people at the end of our data point. I just
There's
love
a
the
true
turns of
engineer.
phrases that we're
That's a true engineer.
That is. I was doing some work at IBM years and years and years and years and years and years ago, and we were talking about feelings and empathy. And this is no lie. One of them, raised their hand and said, "Can you define feeling for me?" And I think it was James Joyce wrote a book called The Dubliners, and there's a character in the book, actually in the opening couple of paragraphs in the book, Mr. Duffy, and the opening line was, "Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body."
Yeah.
And the book goes on to describe this abysmal life that Mr. Duffy has got because he isn't connected. And that connection wasn't just connected to self, but as a consequence, not connected to anybody else or even connected to his life. So when you're talking about spark the heart, I'm very intrigued here, Dr. Price. How do you engineer, to your term here, engineer empathy in the organization such that it becomes not just an intellectual construct, but it actually becomes a living part of the work experience?
I'm so glad that you brought up the concept of feelings and emotions because I was horrible at that. And I worked at a place where almost everyone around me were feelers. That's what I called them. We were in the business of emoting, but my job was to take one product and make 50 million of them. And so I learned very quickly that when someone would ask me how I was, I wouldn't say fine because they had this masterful art of realizing if you weren't fine or if was there anything under that? They'd come back by your office later and say, "Are you sure you're okay?" And so I adopted a habit of when someone would ask me how I was doing, I would say, "Fantastic." If I were any better, there'd be two of me. And that would cause those people to leave me alone. And it was pure strategy. I don't have time for you and your feelings. I've got things to do. And I read a book called Permission to Feel. And I think it's a wonderful complement to my work because there's something called the mood meter, and it has 100 different emotions or moods on it. And I was given an assignment by my therapist. 3 times a day, I want you to check your mood and pick one of these things because fantastic is not a feeling. All right, fantastic is not a feeling. But also, when I was teaching emotional intelligence classes, I was teaching people how to appear with gravitas, which is the definition of showing up without emotion or feeling and being neutral, because you have the ability to calm the rest of the organization. The problem with that is suppressed emotions always come out, just not at the time we want them to. And so,
Bravo.
yes, so one of the ways that I engineer empathy is to help people actually get in touch with their emotions. You don't have to tell anybody else if you don't want to be vulnerable in that way, but you need to express it. You can either write it down or with a trusted colleague or partner if you don't trust someone else, and then you can regulate. But if you try to regulate before you understand and recognize, that's what's causing so many problems inside our bodies, but also problems inside our organizations. People are hurting and we are giving them lectures instead of hugs. And I'm in the hugging business today.
Nice.
I love it.
There's so many things to go with. And, I remember someone telling me about suppressed emotions, that it's lemon juice. And I'm like, what do you mean it's lemon juice? They said, here's the problem with suppressed emotions is not only do they come out when we don't want them, but they come out when we're squeezed the most, when we squeeze a lemon. And, when I watched Will Smith at the greatest honor of his life, I thought,
Yes.
lemon juice.
Lemon juice.
There's lemon juice right there. That's
There's
what they were
lemon juice.
teaching me. And, it's interesting because you are, an extraordinary example of growth and of having an open mind in a very closed-minded situation as an engineer. And one of the things that really struck a chord with me, because I'm the opposite. I'm a clairsentient. I feel everything, and I cry on stage, and I hug everybody. And but it was interesting because on the other side, we both ended up in the same place that had an extraordinary, I think, impact on our life. And you mentioned your therapist. And as much as I'm a clairsentient and this feeler in touch with my emotions my whole life, I had some childhood trauma that I had to deal with that I was suppressing, that it took until I was 50 years old with, another great kick in the ass from my wife, who's always, making sure that I reach my potential. That's what she's been put here on earth in my existence for, is she's not going to let my life waste away, and has saved it several times. People just assumed that I had been to a therapist since my 30s, since I lost everything. Like I'd be the guy for sure sharing my feelings, paying someone $250 an hour to share my feelings. That's me, right? But what was the catalyst for you, being a non-feeler, to actually take? Because there's a big step for the feeler, me. How'd you take that big step to go to a therapist and realize this may actually help you?
Honest answer?
Yeah.
So when I first started going, it was just so I could have a private space, and they were sworn to secrecy. I wasn't going because I was trying to get help. I was going because I needed a confidant.
I got to interrupt you because people ask me about meditation. I always tell them, honestly, the lady that taught me to meditate said I can raise your awareness, and she literally evoked the fact that I wanted to learn how to be aware when to buy or sell. Like the most non-meditative thing in the world. That's how I started meditation. I wanted to raise my awareness to when to buy or sell. But go ahead. It's very similar.
Listen, it's like, what's in it for me? That's what most people are. I mean, let me not project onto other people. That was what it was for me. How can I have a private space? This person's sworn to secrecy. My executive coach within the organization, I knew that person was not sworn to secrecy. So I was using therapy in that way. And when my mother died, I was just like anybody else who, has a parent who dies. You're grieving, you get your 3 days of bereavement, then you go back to work. The problem was my mother had been killed by a drunk driver. So we were then launched into this murder trial that drug on forever. And I was back at work. We're going to court. We're seeing the police report with all the gory details, all the things, right? And when I would get to work, my boss, lovely person, would say, how are you doing? And then 2 seconds later, okay, let's talk about where we are on these projects, right?
Yeah.
The projects.
Yeah. Check.
I'm fantastic.
I did the empathy. Now let's go to work.
And that's exactly right. I did that thing HR told me to do. And so now let's talk about these outcomes. And for one of the first times in my life, I was on the other side of what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the reasons that David and I wrote Compassionate Capitalism was literally about the missing of the lack of empathy in an organization. And one of the catalysts for me when I sat down and actually drafted the book and outlined it was my good friend Raj Sisodia had written a book called Firms of Endearment, which I think is one of the best book titles I have ever heard in my life.
Oh,
Firms
it's
of Endearment.
fantastic. I love that title.
And what he did was he charted organizations that actually had love, empathy, care as a formal value set. And how did they perform against the S&P? How did they perform against Jim Collins's good to great companies? It wasn't just an incremental improvement over those two categorical classes. It was exponential performance improvements because people were connected, not just to each other, but they got connected to vision. They got connected. They cared about what was going on.
Yeah. You know, Blaine, people always ask me, they say, well, how else would she have been able to ask you about your personal life and then also ask you about your work? And
Mhm.
I think the answer is really simple. Just don't try to do those two things in the same meeting.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Exactly. Yep.
Dr. Nicole Price. I tell you, Blaine and I both want to come or even speak at the Empathy Summit next year in August.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
That is so up my alley. And I know it is for Dave too. Yeah,
Oh my
we can
goodness.
show up as recent recipients of the Happiness Hall of
Happiness
Fame
Hall of
Award.
Yeah.
The Happiness Hall of Fame Award. That's me. I heard about that. I was listening in. I want to get that award. That's nice.
Well, we have more shows, and I want to next time talk about the lead workshop of logic,
Yes.
empathetic, accountable, and decision making, all in the context of the books that Blaine and I have written. Some within the context of, I got game time decision making, compassionate capitalism. We'll probably have the 5 daily practices and don't do business with dicks out by then. So we'll have lots to talk about over the next year. It'll be a month before Blaine's next birthday as well, so we could celebrate early. Dr. Nicole Price, thank you for joining us. Everyone, check out the book, Spark the Heart. If they could spark the heart in this doctor, they can spark the heart in anyone. Thanks for joining us.
Take care now.
You're
You bet.
awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's awesome.
Oh,
What a paradox that was.
Boy.
CEO of Lively Paradox, by the way, drnicoleprice.com. If you want to check that out, there's a lot to move with there. Blaine, real quick, got a tight
Kick-ass show
schedule. I
today.
have about three minutes till my next call. What's your takeaway of the day?
Paradox. The ability
Paradox.
to hold the paradox. Yeah, the ability to hold two truths. And so performance is valued. So is learning. Yeah, they are two truths. You can hold them both and not be captured just by one. So that's going to be my takeaway today. Be willing to wrestle with paradox.
That's amazing. So was the Tao Te Ching as well with Lao-Tzu and his paradox of everything. So I love that. I'm going to go with the one I thought you were going to go with. So I was trying to think of another one because I thought for sure it was going to be prove versus improvement.
I know
which
I was
is
going to go there.
which is a paradox. So you were tangential to the genius of this show. I want to once again thank you, Blaine, who has made all these shows so wonderful, and our team who just keeps surprising me. I watch a lot of different content, and I'll put these guests up in the information we're sharing with any program, anywhere, any network. You have made Office Hours, the Soul of Business, absolutely a must see as well. So look out, NBC. We're looking Gigi, always here supporting us. I think Gigi will be gone next week with Dr. Joe Dispenza, but we'll handle it with Mikey and Gigi anyways as we're traveling around. BlaineBartlett.com, the mentor of mentors. That's who he is. Make sure you reach out to him. There's nobody better. Happy birthday. We're celebrating you for another year. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
Love you. Awesome. All right. Tomorrow, training, 6 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to be in Indy next week. We're going to be in Utah. We're going to be in San Diego. We're all over the place. David at dmeltzer.com. I can't keep up with myself. So what I've done is I joined my own text community. I joined it, so I get alerted where I'm going to be. 949-298-2905. I'm serious. I decided that was the only way. When people ask me, where am I supposed to be? I can tell my wife, 949-298-2905. I'll send a book, sign it to you, pay for shipping. I got 1 minute. Send all my love to Blaine Bartlett on his birthday. Gigi, Reluca, thank you so much. We're moving and grooving, trying to empower others to be happy. Even if we're not in the Happiness Hall of Fame, we're sure trying to get there. Love you all. Be more interested than interesting. Be kind to your future self. Do good deeds. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, guys.